Welcome everyone. My name is Steve Glassy. I'm an Associate Professor at CQ University and the patron of Animal Evac who's behind this conference. So welcome to the 2021 Global Animal Disaster Management Conference. As I mentioned before, today's session is emergency pet fostering in Cairns with Sue Taylor, who's a Disaster Management Officer, Disaster Management Resilience Officer in Cairns. Today's session is proudly sponsored by C4 Group in New Zealand. And to learn more about Sue and see her abstract, you're welcome to go to our website. Under speakers, you'll find the abstract, but also more information about Sue. But before we start, we've just got some basic housekeeping. The Zoom chat has been disabled, so if you have any questions, use the Q&A board that should be made available to you by now. We also encourage you to use our hashtag, which is hashtag GADMCONF, GADMACONF, for Twitter and other social media. Now, when we end today's session or when you leave today's session, a short evaluation will be made available when you exit. And just again, a reminder, the recording's not available until we edit it and release it as part of the GADMAC Award ceremony in July. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Sue Campbell from Cairns to talk about emergency pet fostering in Cairns. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you, Steve. Ngā mihi nui o te whānau o Aotearoa. I am a proud Kiwi that have been living in Cairns for a little while now, so it's lovely to be able to have this opportunity with our family there, and of course all the other countries that are joining us. So emergency pet fostering in Cairns is an interesting topic for a number of reasons, not the least of which because Cairns is often seen as being this beautiful, quite benign place, but beautiful places can be dangerous. Oh, we've gone to the next slide there early. I'm going to pop back. Sorry about that. So we're easily isolated. We've got one road in and one road out. So once that road's cut off in any kind of event, all our supplies and all our travels are compromised. Our weather, as with everywhere, is becoming less predictable and changing. So recently we had a new event in Cairns called a flash cyclone, which we'd never heard of before. We'd always had at least 2 to 3 days warning of cyclones, but this one back in January was a flash cyclone, tropical cyclone Kimmy, which literally evolved from nowhere and had us on our feet. So some of these events may be smaller, but they are becoming very intense and or quite localised. So in the Cairns region, a reasonably small geographic area, but quite diverse. And we can sometimes have a major event that affects one part of the region, but not others. We're also vulnerable through a wide range of hazards. So cyclones and storm surge are our major concern. Also flash flooding. So we have 3 major catchment areas in the region. And you may be surprised to hear, yes, bushfires, even though we're the wet tropics. Again, our climate's changing, and so if we have very dry seasons, we can also have bushfires. Also, yes, tsunami. So although we have the Great Barrier Reef, it's not one long continuous line of reef, and it's certainly no real defence against a major tsunami event. We're also prone to landslips, very friable soils and quite steep hillsides around the area. And heat waves have been a new experience for us in the last 3 or 4 years, again with this changing kind of weather. We've also got 3 referable dams in the region. So a referable dam is one where anybody downstream can be affected by a problem with that dam. And so these areas leave us quite exposed to that number of hazards. Additionally, and certainly in my work in resilience development in Cairns, it's been a very long time since we had a major event here. So people have become really quite complacent and just sort of thinking that these things, you know, they won't happen in Cairns anymore. We don't know where this thinking has come from, but it's certainly very prevalent. And the further we get from having had a major event, the more entrenched that thinking becomes. So yeah, this human factor is one of our critical focuses in our ongoing work in resilience and disaster management in general. Lots of new residents and a transitory population. So even with the changes that are happening under COVID, People are moving to Cairns from other areas because they're seeing it as attractive and a place to live that's further away from some of the hazards that COVID and some of these other changes in the world are bringing. And we have a significant population aged 70 plus, so that's spread throughout the region. This is interesting. Across Australia, we actually have a comparatively high proportion of dog ownership. So we've got 20,000 registered dogs and another 5,000 that my colleagues call audited, or dogs that are picked up that are not registered but are checked on through an annual system that the council runs. And an estimated 2,500 to 10,000 cats. I've put the question mark there because cats are supposed to be registered here, but people tend not to do it. And it's very difficult to check on cat numbers for obvious reasons. We also have a high number of people living in storm surge evacuation zones. So the basic principle in Cairns is that we only evacuate in cyclones for storm surge. And these are areas that are close to sea level, where we do have increasing number of population growth, and that continues with these new people moving to Cairns. So animals are not allowed in our public storm tide cyclone shelters unless they're official assistance animals. The policy has been around for well over 10 years now, but often controversial. The issue really is that we've got no way of really looking after animals that are brought into these lockdown facilities during cyclones. Additionally, the Council of Cairns, the RSPCA and the Young Animals Protection Society in Cairns are also sited in storm surge and flood zones. So those facilities would also have to be evacuated in a cyclone event that brings storm surge or a major flood event. And of course, we have this issue of people are very reluctant to evacuate without their pets or to be separated from their pets. So we've obviously all, I think, had plenty of examples over the years where people have basically refused to leave home when they haven't been able to take their pets with them. And the lovely photo there is actually my boss, my manager, with his Groodle. So this attachment to pets was something we really wanted you to see as something we know and care about locally. So some years ago, a group of people really were looking at how they could support older people to keep their pets living with them at home. And the focus was very much on people that have limited financial means. So folks that were not able to pay to have people come to their home to help them look after their pets, or were considering having to move into a residential facility without being able to take their cats and dogs and so on with them. So Tricia Miles, this lady in her 70s, and a number of friends started to talk to the local Member of Parliament, care service providers, residential facilities and so on, and coming to the council to ask how they could establish this group and what that might involve. There were examples in other parts of Queensland where similar groups had been established, but the Cairns environment's a little bit different, different vulnerabilities, different kinds of community makeup and so on. And there was a fair bit of discussion going on at this time about what could be done. So this core purpose was really to maintain the ability for folks to keep those pets with them. There were a number of meetings. I started going to the meetings as a council representative to talk about some of these vulnerabilities. And the question of, what happens in emergencies very quickly arose as an obvious concern. And there were some pretty awful stories that came from severe tropical cyclone Yasi, major flooding events. There was a tsunami scare in Cairns 10 or 12 years ago, with people just talking about the intense difficulties they experienced in trying to work out where to go and what to do when they couldn't take their loved ones, their loved animals with them. So originally input was very much around how the disaster procedures actually work in those circumstances, the sort of information we could provide and raising awareness about what to do. But as time went on, this opportunity really came up and started to evolve around the options that there might be for pet fostering in emergency situations. And I could really sort of foresee that there were some opportunities here for us to look at people that would really need assistance in having their animals looked after in some kind of emergency event. And I very quickly became part of that group and a bit of a, I guess, a sort of a council advisor on that project. So the group that was formed is called Animal Care for Seniors at Home. And the lovely photo there is of Tricia, who was the main person that established this work, and her two dogs. The little Alice that's in her arms there, Alice, was a rescue bush dog. So Animal Care for Seniors at Home is a not-for-profit group that brings together older and or infirm people. So it's not necessarily just older people, their pets and volunteers that can help them with basic tasks and looking for those animals, where they're living at home. So it's all sorts of things, primarily actually dog walking. So for people that are having trouble getting out and about with their dog, volunteers will come and walk the dog or undertake different activities in agreement with the owner. So it's all done as a one-on-one service with the animal's owner. Or it might be pet grooming, and that sometimes applies to cats, feeding options, advice on medication, home adaptations for pets and so on. So we've had some great examples through the group of little inventions that the volunteers have come up with to help people that might have trouble bending down to feed their animals, with providing feeding stations and things like that for them. The focus is very much on the animal and not on the person, because a lot of the issues that started to arise were around things like what happens if the volunteer turns up and the older person is unwell, or they've had an accident and so on. So there are procedures in place for that, but the focus is very much on looking after the animals. So this other option that was coming up and has been well used, in fact, on a regular basis, is also around short-term fostering, perhaps while the owner is unwell or has had to go to hospital, or perhaps has to go away. And we've extended that service now to an emergency fostering option for disaster events. You're possibly thinking, does this require training and certification and so on? Essentially, all these people that assist as Animal Care for Seniors at Home volunteers comply with basic criteria that meet the Australian volunteering standards. And most of them have some demonstrated experience with animals. So either they're animal owners themselves, or they've had some background around these issues, or actually they pick it up, as they go along and working with other volunteers and with the animal owners. So we haven't pushed compliance standards and things like that. It's very much about making sure that volunteers meet agreed standards that are already in place. So, how does this work in operation, and how have we managed to pull it all together? So through Animal Care for Seniors at Home, volunteers who are willing to register to be an emergency foster carer register separately for that service, and we run that system collaboratively. So the disaster management team here in Cairns liaises with Animal Care for Seniors at Home around this on a regular basis, and we're in touch with those volunteers. We have regular updates for them through emails and briefings and meetings and so on, so that they're aware of exactly what they might need to do and the sorts of events that might be coming up. Animal Care for Seniors at Home also provides us at the Disaster Management Unit with a list of their clients that live in storm surge zones through the summer. So we have that list updated on a monthly basis, so that if we do have an event that would involve an evacuation, either of a storm surge or something like a major flood, we know exactly where those clients are and who their volunteers are. We then also do a check with another system that we have here called the Cairns Evacuation and Recovery Register. So that's a separate list of people that we will support to move to a safer place in an emergency if they have no means of doing that themselves. So the criteria for that are quite strict. Because essentially they'll be taken to somewhere like a storm surge cyclone shelter or an evacuation facility with very limited means. But it also means that we know whether people who are registered with Animal Care for Seniors at Home are also on our evacuation and recovery register, and means we can absolutely give them priority. So it's a very systematically based process, I guess, of making sure that we know we've got everybody covered. Animal Care for Seniors at Home volunteers on a day-to-day basis assist all their clients with household emergency planning. So one of the things that they do when they meet a new client is to run through household emergency plan processes with them, so that even if they're going to have an arrangement between themselves and an emergency, they've got that sorted beforehand. And we provide that household emergency plan template. And we also assist those volunteers and clients if they need any specific help with pulling that plan together. And sometimes that's just things like explaining to people how to find out whether they live in one of these hazard zones and what that means for them if they might need to evacuate elsewhere. We also share that information with Far North Queensland volunteers. So this is a group, formally constituted group that manages volunteering in emergencies in Cairns, so that they know who else is on that list and how we might bring those different initiatives together if we have volunteering requests or offers post a disaster event. Another service that we now have animal care for seniors at home involved with is call it an urgent advice email list. So this is a dedicated email list that we run in the unit for service providers of all different sorts. It includes multicultural support groups, residential facilities and so on, but animal care for seniors at home is on that list, so that if something's coming, they get sent an early advice of that event coming up, and they've got some ability to start planning ahead with us for emergency pet fostering and so on. And then finally, all those procedures are written into our operational disaster plans and other documents, so that whoever's using those plans is able to make sure that all these things have been checked off when we're getting ready to respond, to a particular event. So it is actually all operationalized as well as maintained as an ongoing relationship. So how is this sustainable into the future? And really this comes back to partly it's procedure, but partly it's also making sure we've got this ongoing and involvement with animal care for seniors at home. So I continue to go to the meetings, I maintain that relationship with those people so that we all know who we are and we know where everything is at during the year. And this issue of maintaining these currencies of lists and registers and contacts and so on is critically important. As I'm sure you're all aware, when an emergency happens, if you don't have that information up to date, nothing that your plan comes together at the time. I provide support through providing current disaster information updates and so on. We share some funding opportunities and we participate in events together. So the photo there is of a number of the animal care for seniors at home volunteers with their own animals, but also animals that they support for other people. We went to an event called Paws on the Path, which is a fundraiser with run and walk with dogs and their carers, and also help raise money through these events. So these things help make sure we can keep the group going. And we also help facilitate a liaison with other relevant groups and organisations and service providers and so on. So service provision is a rapidly growing industry in the Cairns region through things like the National Disability Insurance Scheme, this growth in our older population and so on. There's absolutely no shortage of the need for these sorts of services. And we provide assistance with problem resolution. So one of the issues was, one of the animal care for seniors at home clients was having problems. One of the volunteers went to try to get her dog. They couldn't get emergency access to the property. So we use things like our local disaster management group contacts to help facilitate resolutions to those sorts of problems. It's pretty everyday business for us, but it makes a big difference to animal care for seniors at home. And going into the future, resilience is a shared responsibility. And we keep this sort of well-established relationship now going very strongly through an ongoing commitment to each other, but also trust and reliability, so that if the group's chair or any of the volunteers are contacting us, we've got that relationship and we know that we can trust each other to sort of do the things that we've agreed to get on with. And we continue with these public engagement opportunities with different expos, shows, community activities and so on. The picture there is of myself, my colleague Katrina, and Terry, who's one of the long-term volunteers with Animal Care for Seniors at Home at a seniors expo. So we're able to pass all this information on literally, I was going to say from the horse's mouth, from the volunteer's mouth or the dog's mouth, to potential clients for Animal Care for Seniors at Home and people interested in emergency activities. And we share each other's information and resources at appropriate venues. We've also produced more recently a specific information card for Cairns on caring for your pets in disasters, so that all the information is locally tailored and anybody picking these things up knows how they can get in touch with animal care and the emergency fostering options that are available to them. And Steve, I'm hoping we've got time to show this video. What do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go for it.
Okay, now I'm hoping I get this right because I have to stop sharing, I think. And or share. Let's see if I get this wrong. Can you let me know? And go to the video link.
Right. Can you hear that?
Yes, sir, we can hear it.
And see it?
You're good.
They don't want to leave because they want to take their pet with them, and it's just not practical a lot of the time. It's, I think, pretty traumatic for people to have to leave their pets. I know how I'd feel. I wouldn't be leaving the house.
Not knowing what's going to happen with their pet, if they need to evacuate from their home, there's a real stress for the pet. Cairns Council are very good in identifying that this is an area that people need to consider and put into place their action plan, what's to happen for the pets.
So we're very concerned in an emergency that those pets might not be well cared for and well managed under a plan. And particularly for people who are more vulnerable through age or disability or not being able to speak English well, really haven't thought about what to do with their pets. And when they have to be evacuated or moved from their houses, worry about it too late. So this is an issue that councils around the country are battling with frequently. So we were trying to come up with a solution to that problem where we could have a situation where pets were being well looked after without their owners necessarily there, and giving the owners some degree of confidence that their pets were being looked after for a short period of time. So it's only for the response of the emergency. It's not going to be for a long period, more than 2 or 3 days, for example.
Animal Care for Seniors at Home is a program that was developed by a lady who volunteered at one of the local refuges, and she was becoming more and more distressed by older persons having to bring their pet in and surrender them when they could no longer care for them adequately because of their health or infirmities. If Cairns is struck by a disaster where people need to be evacuated, we as a group provide a listing to Cairns Regional Council with our clients listed in priority order for evacuation, and we also have a list of our volunteers who are in a position to either foster or otherwise help out. Some of our volunteers live in the evacuation zone, so they obviously can't help, but we'll just work hand in hand with council and we'll make arrangements to help with the evacuation of the animals.
It started as an idea to help the elderly look after their pets, and we had about 5 volunteers who attended the first meeting, and about 3 or 4 or 5 clients, and it snowballed, which is wonderful, which demonstrated there was a need. We have about 60 volunteers and a similar number of pets and clients. So it's worthwhile, and it's obviously needed.
You wouldn't leave your children at home alone if something happened to your house in an emergency. You shouldn't do that to your pets as well. Your plan needs to include them for staying or going. And if you're not sure and you need advice, ask us at the Disaster Management Unit and we can provide you with some support for getting that plan together.
So we've got a question about sharing the volunteer criteria, and I can definitely do that. If people, or if we're able to get people's email addresses, I can certainly send that information through. On average, how many households are registered each year? We in terms of the evacuation and recovery register, we have about, it's individual people, not households. So anywhere between 50 and 60 people at any one time, but for the emergency pet fostering, probably 10 or 15. So it's not a huge number throughout the region. We've got a question about in a disaster, can you assist people who are not registered but maybe near you that you're already responding to? We've certainly got processes in place where we can perhaps assist with that. So I'm happy to send a more detailed answer about that too. And about insurance, because that's an issue that keeps coming up with volunteers. So if people are able to, I can get people's email addresses, I will reply to those issues separately. And the info card, I was actually looking for it on the website. We haven't loaded it because it's new, but I will get it put on the website so you can have a look at it.
And what we can do, Sue, is we can get some files or links from you and put those up on the Facebook as an interim.
Just trying to work out where the sound's coming from. It's really distracting at this end.
I think it may be,
do you background check your volunteers and fosters? Yes. So I'm not sure where you're from, Karen, but we have a system here called a blue card. And we use that to, yeah, all our volunteers are required to have a blue card that are working with those vulnerable people.
So it may be that you may have another browser open which may have gone to YouTube, and it may be just.
No, I don't know. It shouldn't be. It's really, sorry. It's very annoying.
All good. We'll navigate through that. You've answered a few questions there, so that's all good. So in terms of Queensland and your area, who's the lead agency for coordinating animals in disasters, and how does this plan and concept fit in with the arrangements or expectations that they set?
Sorry, can you ask me that again, Steve? I've just gotten rid of that other awful stuff. Thanks, Jasper.
Fantastic. So who is the lead agency for animals and disasters in Queensland, and how does the concept that you've developed fit in with those arrangements or plans?
That's a very good question. Our sort of more technical arrangement around animal management is with the RSPCA in Queensland, and we certainly have an arrangement and a relationship with the RSPCA here in Cairns. But because their physical facility is also in a difficult area, we don't have a lot of options around that. The arrangement that we've got, it's very much up to local governments. So the Queensland disaster management arrangements rely on local government response to major coordinated events. And so we have to really come up with our own solutions that work in our own local government areas. And I just think we've been very fortunate with this opportunity here.
Absolutely. And what about one person's just seeking a bit of clarification? Does someone help the elderly physically evacuate their house or foster their pets while they're in the shelter? Because I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding around where these animals go to if they can't go to a official human evacuation centre.
So the animals go to the emergency fostering person's own home, and are taken in for the period of the emergency by that emergency fostering person. So they don't come to the shelter at all unless they're an assistance animal. So the person may come to the shelter, but they do have to be separated from their pet. But the pet is going to somebody's house that's safe with somebody that's got some experience in looking after the animals.
Absolutely. And I know you received an award for this, didn't you?
We did.
Which is great acknowledgement for, I think, the innovation and the importance of your work. And on that legacy that you are providing, are there any other councils around Australia or elsewhere that are now engaging or looking at replicating the model that you have developed?
I know other people have been looking at it. I think that the issue is whether there is a group like Animal Care for Seniors at home that people can connect with. So we're very focused here on community resilience and, communities taking responsibility for themselves with these things. And I think we've just been fortunate that the opportunity came up and I was able to work with Animal Care to make this happen. So it does depend very much on what's around in the local area. And it does come, very much back down to, I think, what communities themselves are willing and able to resource.
So in terms of the evacuation of the animals, does that sort of come down to the risk level in terms of if we've got enough advance warning, the volunteers that you have go out and help, evacuate under a sort of a more less chaotic sort of stage of the impending disaster, or if it's getting more severe, is it the emergency services that go in and do the evacuation and then connect that person and their animal with that service if they're one of your service users?
Under this arrangement, we wouldn't be calling in emergency services unless we really needed them. It's very much so the disaster management unit facilitates the collection of the pet and the removal of the person for the evacuation scenario as a service, but it's then undertaken that the work with the animal is undertaken by the emergency carer, the emergency fosterer. But we have to make that happen simultaneously. So it does take a bit of coordination. And it's also why it won't really work for large numbers of people. But I qualify that by saying we make it very clear here that people must have a plan for their own pets, and that this service is only for people that really don't have any other choice, and have already planned and thought about it ahead so that they know they can put that plan into action.
Absolutely. And what about, and I think you've just really maybe covered it already. It says one of the questions from Lynn was, do you provide vet care if needed? And if so, do you cover the costs? I assume that's still the legal ownership of the animal doesn't change. And
that's correct. The legal ownership of the animal doesn't change, and the under animal care for seniors at home's normal provisions, the owner covers any costs associated with the animal's care. Having said that, sometimes the disaster recovery funding arrangements will cover some of these things post an event, but that changes kind of on a yearly basis, and that's run at the state level. So we're not really responsible for managing that side of it. But yeah, the costs normally lie with the owner.
And I know that looking at research in the States and other areas, there was some really fantastic work done by in the state of Louisiana, and they looked at all the different types of animal sheltering. One was the animal-only shelter, which is essentially the owners are kept separated and volunteers look after the animal. It would be a temporary shelter. Then they moved to another option of co-location. So the owner's maintaining care, but they may be in a mesh or a shelter, human shelter that's in close proximity to an animal facility where they maintain the care. And then the more Rolls-Royce that's come out has been the cohabitation, where family units are given space to be kept together. And the cost of all these different levels, they found that it was about $25 a day per animal to do animal-only shelters. Then it went to $5 a day for co-location, and it dropped down to $1 a day for cohabitation. And again, it was a similar human resourcing model that you needed a huge number of volunteers for animal only, and by the time you got down to cohabitation, literally you only need 1 or 2 people to look after or facilitate owners looking after literally hundreds of animals. So what do you think the barriers are with not necessarily Cairns, but Australia in general, to move beyond the mindset that animals go one way, people go another, but yet we say they're part of the family, and you should treat them as so?
The issue that we have here is really around the emergency sort of sheltering scenario. So that immediate, lockdown first 24 hours with the pet. The safety requirements that we have legislatively just don't allow for it. There just isn't a solution to that at the moment. But post-event, where you've got longer-term evacuation centres and so on, the will and the value in having pets and people together is undeniable. And particularly from a recovery point of view, the comfort and security and all those other things that come from having the animals that you're close to with you are important. But I think, it's the legislation around safety requirements is definitely one of those barriers, and we haven't really been able to get here past the idea of having separate facilities. Even if we're able to take animals into shelters, it would not be at the moment with their owners, and also the numbers don't provide for it. we have very limited formal sheltering facilities as it is, and they take minimal numbers of people. So, you know, the real solution is to, as we do with animal care for seniors at home now, be planning these things on a day-to-day basis so that when an emergency happens, you've already thought it through, you've got an option that will work in an immediate response capacity, and a way to reunite pets with their owners afterwards, with people that they trust.
Absolutely. And Lindell was sort of asked, what are the barriers to changing that legislation?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to answer that.
That can always come out in your opinion piece for AGM if you wish.
Yeah, there'll be something that comes out later. I'd like to, as a resilience and an engagement practitioner, it's so hard to get past the things that people need that will work for them, and then that, you know, butts up against kind of rules and policies and so on. But I mean, as someone that is operational in an emergency, and someone that is usually heavily involved with opening and running shelters, I completely understand the difficulties in having very frightened people and very frightened animals in one very, very scary lockdown space. None of this is ideal, and none of us wants to do it, and hopefully we don't have to do it very often. And it really does only apply to these sort of lockdown scenarios. But you also need people that understand the connections between owners and their animals, and the importance that we give that.
So is there a distinction between cyclone shelters and evacuation centres? I mean,
absolutely. So yeah, lockdown is for cyclones only because the wind is so dangerous. The common terminology here is that that's a public storm tide cyclone shelter. Then we have, the terminology is kind of interesting, you know, other sorts of evacuation facilities for emergencies and floods. People don't need to be locked in, but very limited facilities in that response phase. You know, it's not going to be great having lots of people crammed in together with animals or anybody else. But then after the event, you know, if people can't go home or their homes are unlivable, an evacuation centre is a longer term solution, and you can certainly have your pets there with you.
Right, so it's just during the initial cyclone sort of strike sort of phase.
Yeah.
So where does that put the owners? And look, I know the central premise is that people have to take responsibility for their animals, just like their children. In some cases, they feel that they are children, but in this case, we're also saying you can't be with your children as well during that sort of lockdown sort of phase potentially. So, what do people do that aren't in those vulnerable groups that the program supports? What do they do with their pets? Are they left in places that are exposed to these hazards?
Well, our standard procedure in Cairns is that if you know you live in one of these hazard zones, that you pre-make an arrangement to go somewhere else that's safer, so and that you can take your pet there with you. So this actually applies to my personal situation, where we live in an area that's out of hazard zones, and we have arrangements with friends, elderly friends and friends more our age, that they can bring their animals to our house, and that they'll be, you know, there in a safe environment. So it is, you know, this is a much wider resilience issue really about people understanding the hazards that they're exposed to early on, and making sure that their household plan, you know, is suitable for the area that they're living in at the time.
Absolutely, and I know that having worked in sort of shelters, one of the things that I saw in the last sort of decade is at some of these animal shelters, they actually look at double bunking. So, you know, two animals together in the same cage. And what that does, it actually reduces the noise. You can walk into kennels and it's just quiet rather than this deafening sort of ruckus of individual dogs. So in some ways, the actual, you know, the co-location can actually provide, you know, some sort of comfort for the animals as well. And, you know, from the sounds of it, I know there was a great presentation provided by Tim Percival from American SPCA at the NACEP conference in 2019, and he spoke about these different sheltering models. And yeah, it's something that I think that us as practitioners probably need to have more engagement, and academics more engagement with also the emergency services about some of the lessons that have been identified in the US and some of the models that actually are working really well. I know that, and I'm glad that the model that you're promoting is about using existing fostering systems. It's not on the fly. I know some of the research that I did looking at the Edgecombe floods 2017, there were lots of spontaneous volunteers, which was great in the first few days, but then you had situations, people being out of their house for months, the fostering family kids fall in love with the dog and don't want to return it. The interest wanes and you're left with dogs chained up that don't get walked, and then the RSPCA turn up, and then the owner, or actually not the owner, but the person in charge legally says it's not their dog and dismisses responsibility. So I think unless you've got existing systems through organisations like the group that you've been working with the RSPCA or any other animal welfare league that have existing fostering programs, I mean, I think that's probably one of the key messages is to not create something on the fly, have something that's pre-existing. So welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a lot to do with volunteering in my life through work and in my personal life. And yeah, a lot of things start off well, but it's very difficult to maintain them. And I think that was one of my points about sort of sustainability into the future, that we've got a vested interest in making sure that this group, you know, is successful in its community now. And a commitment to ensuring the quality of that group's services, I guess. Many of the people that are involved with animal care for seniors at home have been there for many, many years now. They're well organised, they're compassionate, they're systematic, and they understand the issues that they're dealing with. I see there's been a couple of questions about who inspects the foster volunteer house and so on. We're in touch with those people through the disaster management unit and the group, and using the group does give it that ongoing sort of commitment as well. And I can completely take your point, Steve, about things are it easily goes wrong when it's a more spontaneous arrangement. This way we know we've got people with experience and backup, and we know that they can go to other people within the group to get assistance, and to vets, in fact. So vets, a number of the vets in Cairns have bought in to support the program, and will do things like provide low-cost vet care and so on for some of the animal care for seniors at home clients. So it's not, you know, it's not the perfect answer, and I'm not actually sure that there is one in this scenario. It's difficult in a place like Cairns because although we're geographically small, we face all those hazards and a large population number kind of at risk of those hazards. So we're really looking for sort of solutions that work for the people that need them the most. And then the emphasis is very much on other people making their own arrangements and being responsible, you know, as much as they can within their own household.
Absolutely. And I was just going to, one of the points, I can't see who did it, it's been cleared, but I remember one of the quite a valid point around the different types of animal sheltering in terms of animal only, the co-location and the cohabitation model, that with COVID, the first two are very high risk in terms of transmission of COVID. So, you know, the models of around cohabitation is something that, you know, is something that's more compatible or potentially even expected in the COVID and other sort of similar emergencies. And I think as we both know, natural hazards aren't taking a holiday because COVID's here. And so we've got to make sure our plans can actually be, provide that social distancing and sort of family unit bubble protection when we start to evacuate. Look, I'm gonna call it we've had some great questions, and what we will be doing, because we didn't really seek clarification from our presenters in terms of sharing email addresses, etc., but that will be something that we'll be looking for. If you've got information or you'd like to share your contact details or even just your website, if you're able to flick that through to me, I can get Rebecca to get that up onto our Facebook. We can also maybe share that video too on Facebook as a bit of a taster to your session. But look, it's been a very well attended and thoroughly interesting program, and I think you may be onto a great idea that hopefully others can replicate. So thank you on behalf of all the animals and the people for championing such innovation. And I'm really pleased to hear that you were acknowledged through those Resilience Awards for the concept. So keep up the good fight, and thank you very much for presenting today at GADMAC.
Thanks, Steve. Actually, can I just answer? There's one question here
sure.
I'd really like to answer because it's got a lovely response. So Vivi's asking, especially as this model is based on seniors at home, is there some sort of MOU should the senior pass away once the animal is with the foster? We have actually had that happen, not in an emergency situation, but a couple of times. And the owner has asked for the pet to go to the foster carer as their permanent charge. So some of the animals, actually one of them I think that you've seen in the video was in that little terrier, was in that situation. And so they've actually gone to live with the foster carer, and it's just lovely.
Absolutely. What a great fitting answer.
Beautiful outcome, yeah.
Beautiful outcome. Look, everyone, thank you so much for attending the session with Sue. Again, it is recorded. We'll edit it and have it available later this year. But in the meantime, we'll get some information from Sue and put that up on our Facebook. And again, thanks for joining us, everyone. And again, thanks Sue Campbell from Cairns Regional Council, who's championing this great initiative. So thanks for joining us today.
Haere rā.
Haere rā.